The best stories have you in them. Tell a story that has you in it and make sure to have multiple good stories in your story bank. That is a leadership responsibility, to kind of re-engage the room to believe that it's not lost. Speak truth to the moment, frame it properly. But then you need to offer hope. There's nothing more powerful in the dynamic of human relationship than a belief that you are against the world.
What does it feel like when onboarding, payroll, compliance, and even IT access all run through one platform? It feels like everything finally works together and HR finally has room to scale. Deal brings global people operations into one place, so new hires start strong, workflows stay compliant, and teams move faster. See it in action at del.com/NickDayHR. Hello and welcome back to the HR L&D podcast. I am, of course, your host. My name is Nick Day. I'm the CEO at JGA Recruitment Group. We're a specialist global HR recruiter. If you are new to the show, welcome. Please do remember to follow or subscribe and review the show as well if you can. But most importantly, remember to share this show with all of your HR colleagues and friends, because together we can really raise the profile of people management and human resources worldwide. And actually, we've got someone today who's been very much shaping the future of talent, shaping the future of leadership in the workplace. It's someone whose insights into greatness, teams, and storytelling have inspired not just a nation, but millions around the globe. In fact, one of those people, which I don't think my guest even knows today, is Patricia Fripp, who I've had on this show recently, who actually has written a wonderful testimonial for our guest today and his services and his talks. We are, of course, joined by the renowned Don Yaeger, who's a Hall of Fame speaker, Sports Illustrated Associate Director, or long-time executive coach, 12-time New York Times best-selling author, and the brilliant mind behind another wonderful podcast. If you don't listen to it already, go and subscribe, called the Corporate Competitor Podcast. And I will put a link in the show notes if you want to find out more about that. But most importantly, Don has just released a wonderful new book called The New Science of Momentum. It's based on 6 years of research, over 250 interviews across leaders in sports, business, politics, the military, and more. And together with General Bernard Banks, Don has uncovered a repeatable model for how elite leaders like you, our listeners, and how you can turn a single spark into sustained momentum. Really, really hard. We've had Alan Stein Jr. talking about how we can sustain our game. We're going to take it a whole level further today. So without further ado, welcome, Don, to the show. Welcome to the HR L&D podcast. How are you feeling?
Nick, thank you. What a great intro. I appreciate you.
Super excited to have you here. You know already what I'm going to ask you. My first question, of course, I ask all my guests. My listeners will already be familiar. What do the words human resources mean to you?
Well, what they've meant to me over the course of a career is the team behind the team, right? It's the team that actually helps surround me with talent. I always loved, like when I was at Sports Illustrated, I argued that it was the greatest collection of writers, the greatest collection of talent ever put together. But, you know, it was that HR team that really helped make sure that we were all, we were synced. They put talent around us that allowed us each to thrive. And I think that that's, you know, sometimes, don't get enough credit. And but I do think they helped make my career better over time.
Fantastic. Well, a great place to start. Now, of course, your book is going to, well, talks a lot about momentum. I want to kind of start there before we talk about the book, because I think sometimes we need a bit of a definition about what really distinguishes momentary success from sustained momentum. I know we talk about this in detail in your book, but I wonder if you can help explain how leaders listening to this can sort of recognize where that spark sits.
So I think that's a great question, because I think one of the great challenges for a lot of people is, and it was for me before I started writing this book, I always believed momentum as a project or as a concept, momentum began with a moment. Right? A moment has to occur in order for momentum to actually take hold. What I didn't understand until I began the work here on this project was that there's actually work being done by great leaders. The best leaders are preparing themselves for the spark. So they're not waiting on the spark. They're actually doing work in advance. And a healthy chunk of that is actually, it's HR related, because it's so important to recruit the right people, and we'll talk more in depth about that. But what happened in my eyes opened in this was that You don't have to wait on the spark. You can actually go do the work in advance to make the spark come to life. And then there's a second half, which is how do you amplify the spark once it's occurred? How do you make sure that it continues to become an important piece of your corporate growth?
I was just thinking there, we talk about, as someone who's also a great storyteller, keynote speaker, you were talking about how you get that spark, but also how you can amplify. I imagine storytelling comes across both of those areas, because often we see a great opportunity, but we see it when we've heard, or we hear a story, or we read a story. And that's what gets our sparks going in our mind and the creative juices flowing. But also then when you've started that process, the momentum, in my experience, is often maintained by that continual story revealing itself. But I'd love to get your perspective as a famed storyteller as well on where does storytelling sit in this spark and this momentum.
Well, storytelling plays its role on before the spark and after, right? So before the spark, you're telling people we're preparing. You're laying out you're framing a story for them of what the future can look like, right? But and then a moment occurs, something happens. Maybe it's the right hire. Maybe you just interjected a new leader, and that leader is your spark, right? That can, the spark doesn't have to be something dramatic that happens in some crazy place. It can literally be just the placement of the right person in the right spot can suddenly change the dynamic. And then the second half of it but the storytelling is also equally important in the second half of the model that and I'll send a version of that for you to be able to put in your show notes. But in that second half, once the spark has occurred, you have to tell everybody, the leader has to be a great storyteller in explaining to people, this is why we did all the work we did on the front end, right? This is why we prepared. This is why we built the proper culture. We hired the right people. This is why it was for this moment we are built to take advantage of it. So storytelling plays a role on both ends of the model. And but as I said, for me, I always believed that it didn't start until the spark. The truth is, the best leaders are building and preparing for a moment.
Nice. I like that. I like that a lot. I think you mentioned the talent space, obviously something I'm very passionate about as a recruiter and a search expert. But I did a talk recently, and actually Patricia Fripp was in attendance. But for the talk that I delivered, it was in the States recently in Orlando. And I was talking about talent and attraction. And in that, I was saying that we need to stop just putting job descriptions out there and listing tasks. We need to tell a story about why we need to join that firm. Tell me about someone who's moved through the ladder and inspires me. But every time we see job adverts these days, they are copied and pasted job specs. And that doesn't, for me, it doesn't initiate a spark. It doesn't build momentum for me to create that application to go. And so I think a lot of organizations are missing out on really great talent through a lack of storytelling. But I know you have some really creative and interesting ideas on talent attraction and how momentum, and through your experience, how we can improve that recruitment process and that talent process. Tell me about what you've discovered.
So, as I said, there are two kind of pods. There's a circle here and a circle here and a spark in the middle, right? In our model. As I said, we'll share the model with your audience in the show notes. But in that first cycle, the most important thing a leader has to do to create the proper the proper foundation for momentum, right? You have to be ready for momentum. To create that foundation, you have to create the right culture. And what you need in that culture is a group of people who are A players who can cheer for other A players, right? Unfortunately, there's a lot of worlds that we live in where there are A players who every time you have some level of success, they take it as an affront, right? Oh no, Nick got that assignment. Oh no, Nick got that sale. And because Nick got the sale, I didn't. And because I didn't, I'm lesser, right? And there are so many people where that internal jealousy, that unwillingness to cheer for your teammate actually begins to eat at the culture of the organization. But the culture is then rooted in who you recruit. And you have to be able to recruit those people who are not just really good at what they do, but who are open and willing to be invested in the we, not the me, right? You have to. It's a mixture of both of those things, and one of the only place in the book where we use a negative example is in the chapter on recruitment, and it's where we show, there was this great basketball team, the Chicago Bulls in the 90s, right? Alan Stein talked to you about that a bit, I'm sure.
He did,
Um,
yeah, yeah. I was a fan. I was a Chicago Bulls fan. I was a '90s boy, and I had
everybody was.
everyone was in
Everybody
the
was.
UK. Yeah,
So you had
yeah.
3 years. Michael Jordan won the title, right, with the Bulls, but then he retired, if you remember, for a couple of years. He stepped away from the game, and his right hand player, Scottie Pippen, stepped in to be the new leader of the Bulls. But in that first season, with Scottie Pippen as leader, they make it to the playoffs, and in the playoffs, they're matched up with the New York Knicks. And in that match, the Knicks, they in Game 3, a pivotal game, there's this window of time when they're tied, and then there's only a few seconds left, and the Bulls coach Phil Jackson calls a timeout, and he says, "Hey, and Pippen is fully expecting. I'm the star of the team. I am the A-dog." Pippen's expecting the play will be called for him to take the last shot. And when he gets to the sidelines, he discovers that the coach is going to actually have another player take that last shot. Another player is going to be, if the shot goes in, will be the star of the game. His name was Tony Kukoc. And Pippen threw a fit. He's like, "Are you kidding me? I've waited all this time behind Michael Jordan, and now I get my moment to be a star, and you're not going to let me be the star?" And he refuses to go in the game.
Wow, I didn't.
He refuses to take his place in the lineup. And the Bulls have to call another timeout. They get into an argument, a fight, a verbal fight right there on the sidelines between player and coach. And from that moment on, Scottie Pippen was never thought of the same by either his teammates or even others in the league. In fact, to this day, if you commit a very selfish act in the NBA, right, it's referred to as pulling a Pippen. All these years later, because selfishness, his greed, his selfish, and it robbed him of his opportunity to be seen as a leader by his teammates because he was more interested in himself and his accolades than he was the good of the team. And so when you're recruiting, you have to recruit people. And this becomes really hard. It's hard. Recruit people, because if they don't root for each other, what will happen is a spark will occur, a big sale will come, a big moment will make itself clear to your team, and there will be so much disunity that you can't capitalize on it. So recruiting the right people allows you to capitalize on the moment and get into that extension of the momentum.
It's a story I didn't know. Obviously, I don't follow it closely enough. I remember being a Chicago Bulls fan. It's a wonderful story, a wonderful example. It brings the cliche, there's no I in team really to the fore here, right? And it's true. I guess you must have been exposed to a lot of really successful teams through your Sports Illustrated writing as well, where you're following leading teams, championship teams. I think what I find really interesting, just as a sports fan, is in that moment as well, he's kind of given the tactics away. It's the final throw, and everyone now knows he's not getting the ball, right? So you're giving,
right.
Now
you're telling the other team, "Oh, I wonder who the second best shooter is on the floor."
Absolutely,
it's Tony Kukoc.
You're not just looking out for your own ego in that moment. He's actually letting all of his teammates down even more by giving the competitive advantage away. So it's a really interesting example.
In fact, the team's elder spokesman, right, Bill Cartwright, a big center, actually blasted him after the game in front of his teammates and said, "By the way, that is not at all what this team needs. If you ever want to be a leader, dude, you just lost it." And so the elder statesman on the team stepped up and said, "You're not our leader. You may be the best player, but you're not our leader."
Yeah, fascinating story. I did not know that. So, well, that kind of leads us nicely into your book, right? Because it's something that Dick Vitale, who's an ESPN analyst, said will help you win in the game of life. It is, of course, called The New Science of Momentum. It's based on over 6 years of your research, and you've spoken to over 250 leaders across sports, business, politics, and more. Tell us a little about the book. What did you discover in those interviews? What were the commonalities?
Well, if you don't mind, I'll kind of go back to the beginning and explain how the
Please.
book even came to be.
That'd be fantastic. Please do.
There was a Super Bowl a number of years ago, some of your listeners might remember, in which the New England Patriots were behind 28-3 to the Atlanta Falcons. And deep into the third quarter, actually, the odds makers gave Atlanta a 99.4% chance of winning. Right, that's where New England had 0.6% odds of actually pulling it out. But then, although everything had gone wrong for most of the game up until that point, a little moment happened, a spark. Tom Brady, the quarterback of the Patriots, had been walking up and down the sidelines going, come on, let's do one good thing, like one good thing. Let's do something right. And as it happened, there was a third down play, 8 yards to go. Tom Brady is the defense is collapsing on him. He's about ready to get sacked, and he escapes. And Tom Brady is probably the slowest human being you'll ever see on a football field. Right? If you ever want to laugh for all of his greatness, go back and watch Tom Brady's running of the 40-yard dash in the combine before he's drafted. It's embarrassing. But Tom Brady escapes and he runs for 9 yards and they get a first down. But the team loses their mind. Like the guy no one expected to do that thing did that thing, which got everybody believing, hey, if Tom will do that, or if he can do that, what can I do to help? And next thing you know, the dynamic of the team started to change. And a few plays later, they score a touchdown. They miss the extra point, but the game is getting closer. And Brady then starts imploring his defense, do something for us. Like, get me the ball back. Let me score. Let me help the team score again. And they did. And suddenly the energy completely changed. One of the players who was on the field that night, Devin McCourty, did an interview with me. And he said, you know what? As the momentum began to switch and everybody could feel it, he said, you could see it in their eyes. He said their eyes started to get big, like, oh, crap. We had them down and we let them back, right? We let them in the game. Our eyes began to narrow because we knew we were coming. Momentum isn't just about, the definition that you'll read in a physics book. Momentum is a state of mind. It's a way of being. It's a belief system, right? That we believe we're moving in a positive direction. And if you, on the other hand, believe you are moving in a negative direction, that happens too. Momentum is more than physics. It's actually it's a series of personnel decisions, right? It's how we choose to collaborate, work together, and grow together. And we were able to show through looking at 4 verticals, right? Sports, obvious. Business, we got an opportunity. NVIDIA, the great company, that is setting the world on fire right now. NVIDIA gave us access to their senior leadership to talk about how they captured momentum, how they were ready for the announcement that ChatGPT was available to the world. Remember, many people don't remember, but ChatGPT was the beginning of the explosion for NVIDIA. They were a nice sized company, but not big. And now by market cap, they're the most wealthy, they're the most valuable company in the world, right? But all of that happened not when ChatGPT was announced. It happened 10 years earlier when NVIDIA began preparing for the influence that artificial intelligence was going to have on the world of technology. They started it while others were just talking about it. And so the one of the co-founders of NVIDIA sat down, gave us hours and hours of time to talk about what it takes to be successful in the world of business. We looked at military. We got some of the greatest generals on the planet talk about how momentum is a part of their battle planning. right? How you have to stack small wins. Momentum is often the stacking of small wins upon each other. And then suddenly you start to feel the wind at your back, right? And then in the world of, it did, in the last one that we did was, so we did politics, we did sports, we did military, and we did business. And in politics, we got a chance to talk to Karl Rove, the great Republican strategist, James Carville, the great Democratic strategist, to talk about how you build momentum in political campaigns, how you want to make sure you're at your peak on election day, right? You don't want to be too often. The momentum allows some of these candidates to peak 6 months before the election, and they never recover as they begin to fall apart after that. They can't keep their momentum. So looking at it holistically allowed us to really feel how momentum can become a part of your business plan.
I mean, it's quite inspirational listening. As a sports fan, you could talk these stories to me all day long, Don, and I would just lap them up. I really would. But I think the great example you gave there with Tom Brady is the idea that there was a chain reaction after it started from him, and it kind of, as it started to infiltrate to everybody else. There's a couple of things that came to mind for me as I sort of reflect on what you've mentioned. One, of course, is mindset. And you mentioned the word beliefs. And there's a word that I love in the English dictionary, which is confabulation, or believing the stories we tell ourselves. Right. Now, in that moment, you'd imagine the Falcons were going, hold on, there's a chance we could lose this. That's what's going through their heads, of course. The others are going,
and what happens when that happens? You start,
you sit back, you defense. Yeah.
Right. I'm no longer the aggressor. I'm now just trying to protect what I have. And when you're doing that, you play differently.
Someone once, you may have heard this, but it's a good friend of mine, a co-host on another show, said to me, Nick, belief is a lie surrounded by BS. Beliefs, the word beliefs. A lie surrounded by, and that's always resonated with me, right? So they're not always true. They're things that we tell ourselves. But you mentioned a really interesting word there, which is we don't want to peak at the wrong time. So we want momentum. We want to be able to harness it. But often, if we're in HR or in learning development, we've got a transformation project. We've got a million different plates we're spinning. Sometimes it's important we do use that momentum so we peak at the right time. So how can we manage it in that way? Because it's a living, breathing chain reaction type thing, to enable it to ensure that we can peak when we need to.
Well, I think a big piece of it is, and this is that communication element on the front end, right? We're working toward. And then when we know that we have come to the place where we need to change the vernacular, we're no longer working toward. This was the moment, right? So it's about part of the way you actually build towards something is you convince those who are working with you that there is a point where all of this effort will suddenly will come to bear, right? It will become evident that this, I know you're thinking these late nights we're working right now and this difficult project that we're struggling with. I know you're thinking this is that what is this going to bring? I promise you, when we're on the other side, you will remember these nights. You will remember that what you did tonight made all the difference and allowed us to become the company, the organization that you will be proud to say you worked here. You will be proud to say you were here that night to make that happen. It's a communication skill, right? It's leadership. And then, by the way, the project's been announced. The world, look at the way the world is reacting to it. Look at the way our fellow employees are reacting to it. It's all this was what we did all that hard work for. This is what, and now let's go out there and take advantage of all the good work that we did.
What I love that is it's really important. You really emphasize there the importance of reflection, but celebrating the success as well. When we get to that moment, there's a great thing I like. I've heard it from somewhere else. It's not mine, but I've always remembered it, where I could fly you to the top of Everest and you could meet me, who's taken the 8-week journey to get to the top. We see the same vista, but it feels entirely different. You know, one's gone through the journey, one's paid the money to get to the top. You're in the same spot, but it's not the same view. For me, you haven't gone on the journey, and that momentum is so important as part of that journey. I know in your book, you talk about a framework. Is it the DARC framework, and how that can help organizations maintain that momentum when there is a crisis? If you're climbing Everest, you're going to be met with many a crisis, I would imagine, from weather to whatever, cold and other things. Tell us a little bit more about that framework.
When the framework when you're facing negative momentum.
Yeah, when I guess during a crisis or during change, when you want to maintain, you're an organization, you're a leader, you want to maintain momentum, but maybe you're hit with something unexpected, or there's change
maybe
happening.
tariffs. Maybe the president announced tariffs that are going to change.
Well, there you go. Great example. Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Maybe maybe the stock market is suddenly turned against you. Maybe sales. Maybe some decision has led people to believe something different about your company. The first and most important thing you have to do in that framework of reversing momentum, and we talked to a number of leaders who were masters at it, several of whom are known as turnaround specialists, right? And the first and most important thing you have to do is speak truth to the moment, right? Don't try to spin it. Don't try to say, oh, by the way, this isn't as bad as people are trying to say, because the people that you work with, they know the truth, and you need them to help you navigate out of this environment. So if you spin the moment, if you try to make it sound something that it's not, what will happen is that they will go, boy, this guy's disconnected from reality. This woman doesn't have any sense of truth. How are they going to actually help us navigate out of this situation? So you need to speak truth to the moment, first thing, right? Frame it properly. But then you need to offer hope. So speak truth, offer hope, explain, maybe look into history and say, you know what, 12 years ago, we were in somewhat of a similar situation. Or 12 years ago, when I was at a different company, we were in a different situation. Whatever that moment, you can look back and say in reflection, this isn't the first time any company's ever been in this environment, right?
Right.
And so look for points of hope that you can offer. By the way, it can be done. And then the third piece is, and we're the team to do it, right? You have to rally the troops. You have to, there's nothing more powerful in the dynamic of human relationship than a belief that you are against the world, right? That you and those who you're with are up against. There's nothing that makes people more likely to give you that discretionary energy than if they believe they are part of this unique opportunity to change history, right? And so, go ahead.
Now, there was a question that came to mind there because you mentioned the word hope. And I was thinking, let's use the Tom Brady example. You gave a great process where stacking small wins can help build momentum. I'm just thinking as you were talking there, I'm trying to put myself in the position of the listener where you're in the middle of, you've got momentum, something's come sideways, maybe it's a tariff change, maybe it's a poor sale, whatever. But ultimately your momentum's been out and you feel like you're losing hope, but you want to rally the troops. So how can we build that conviction? It sounds to me like Tom Brady had huge conviction when he said, we've got a chance, we're going to win this game. But when hope feels like it's lost, as the bookie suggested it was, 0.06, I think you said, how do we get that conviction when you feel like the odds are so stacked against you? Is there a skill to that? Is there something we can do to build that?
That is a leadership responsibility to kind of re-engage the room to believe that it's not lost, that we have been here before, we are built for this moment, and you are the team. If I had to try to turn things around, you'd be the team I'd want to turn it around with. Now, that needs to be true also, right? This would be the team I'd want to be on to try to turn things around. It's a communication skill, right? Which then, leads to the right team chemistry, and the team's chemistry is where you're rallying together, right? Where you're now believing we're the owners of what's going to happen together. So, so much of this is a communication skill, and much of it does begin with leadership. And so, I think if you'll recall in reading the book, the one thing we're most proud of is that at the end of every chapter where we take you through the model, we give leader actions, ways that leaders can use the chapter that we have just been given to actually move the needle on their organization.
So let's use some of those, because there are lots of practical insights in the book. Are there any kind of rituals or practices that HR leaders particular, maybe you could recommend that they utilize, they embedded to help create that living, breathing culture of momentum that prevents stagnation, but also really promotes progress?
I think, when you get into leader actions, one of the places in leader actions that are really powerful in the discussion was in that recruitment section, right? Which is in developing interview models or asking questions during the hiring process to make sure that what you are adding to your team are people who, yes, they're really good. Like, you don't want a bunch of B players because they all like each other, right? What you want are A players who can, as I said before, celebrate each other. And, I've done a lot of work, as I know I have, talking to different people around the Navy SEALs and around elite military units. And one of the things they all say is A players want to play with A players, right? B players want to play with C players. And so, fill yourself with A players, but they need to be ones who can cheer for their fellow A player.
That's interesting you mentioned Navy. We've had a couple of Navy SEALs on this show talking about leadership and adaptability and endurance. And we know that these are qualities that are often highly evident in high performance. And when you think of the top leaders of the major firms, they need to show endurance. They need to be adaptable. They need to maintain that momentum. Are there any kind of personal habits that you've seen in leaders, because you've obviously interviewed many across different functions, that have really helped them to sustain the energy that's required to sustain the momentum?
So you hit on it early, right at the very beginning of our conversation. The real habit that allows them to do the best in that is storytelling, right? It's the ability to kind of, in moments, be able to kind of frame the situation, both positively and negatively. Hey, now, so from a positive standpoint, look, guys, this is amazing. Look what the numbers say. Look what everything look what it says for us. But guess what? The one thing that happens, human nature, is that when things are good, you take your foot off the pedal. It's exactly what happened to the Atlanta Falcons, right? Human nature would have said, keep doing what you're doing, and guess what happens? You're going to win the game. But they started thinking, we got this. They were celebrating in the third quarter. You don't celebrate in the third quarter, right? And you don't celebrate deep in the fourth quarter. The best teams play through the whistle, right? I mean, you've heard that phrase. They play through the end of every opportunity. So one of the things that's really important is storytelling and how you use examples. Now things are rolling. We're moving. We're getting good stuff is happening to us. Guess what? Human nature is going to say, take the afternoon off. I'm going to tell you, we're here to defy human nature. We're not going to let what others would do. We're not going to fall victim to the very same things that have let other great companies, other great organizations. We're not, because I know who we are. And suddenly now you're rallying the troops. And the fact that you're winning does not mean you have to stop rallying the troops. I think that's a really important imperative of great leadership.
That we've discussed a lot of qualities that make up a great leader. We know that momentum enables leaders to allow teams and projects to experience great success, whether that's in sport and politics, whatever it might be. What's the one quality that you've seen in every great leader you've worked with? If you had to narrow it down into one quality, and maybe that's an impossible task, I don't know. But if all the leaders you've worked with, is there one kind of central characteristic, behavior that's resonated through them all?
Yeah, I would tell you, I think if it's not storytelling, it's vision. It's this idea that they see they're several steps ahead, right? While we're in the moment, they're thinking about how this moment plays and what the next couple of moves are going to look like. The best leaders, John Wooden used to say, the great basketball coach, he said to me several times, the best leaders see around corners, right? They don't just see what's evident to everybody else. They actually they understand what the detour could look like as well. And so they are building game plans. They're seeing future opportunities. They're seeing what could happen, and they're building game plans for those moments. So they're not, I mean, you talk to any great manager in a baseball game, and often what they're doing in the first inning or second inning is really meant to set up something really important they want to do in the eighth, right? They're actually, it's not just about the moment. Sometimes the things you're doing are about the future.
Yeah, so it's strategizing. There's a great thing, vision drives decision. And interestingly, going to that Pippen example, Pippen's assumed that he knows how it's going to play. You'd have to trust the coach to say, look, I've seen, they're all expecting it to go to you. We're going to do something different. They're already thinking 3 steps ahead.
You're going to be the decoy.
Exactly.
When he heard that word, he was like, I didn't wait all those years behind Michael Jordan to be the decoy. And in that was the most selfish thing you could say to a group of people who are all on the same team. And the rest of them, I mean, literally, there's sideline video, which I have in a speech that I do on this topic. There's sideline video where other players are just walking by him, just shaking their head. Like, you know what? And they'll never think of him the same.
No, I can imagine. So you've given a great example then of the vision. It's hard not to agree with you. And I'm a huge advocate for storytelling. It's a difficult skill to master, I think, sometimes storytelling. So I'd love to get, as a side question, any practical tips you've got on how we can build and develop that particular skill. Before we get there, what about collectively then? What's the collective skill that a team needs to have, or behavior, or you know, that maybe that's vision again? I'll let you answer the question, but that helps to sustain that momentum as well.
Well, I think the team, that what it has to have to sustain momentum is chemistry, right? It's that ability, and chemistry is different than culture, right? Culture is the stated belief system. Chemistry is in the moment, right? It's how we react to each other. It's how we, you know, are we, and by the way, that does not mean everybody has to love each other, but it means that everybody has to respect each other, right? Like, I may not like you. There may be things about you that drive me crazy. You know, the way you cackle when you laugh drives me nuts, right? And by the way, Nick, I don't know if you cackle when you laugh, but you're the only person on this call.
I'll take it. No offense taken.
But you know what I know is that, Nick, that you are really darn good at what you do. And I'm better because I'm your teammate. That's what you need. You need a group of people who believe that. And by the way, one thing I want to make sure I say about leadership, too often we think of leadership as it's the person with the corner office. It's the person with the best business card or the best parking space. There's nothing in the true definition of leadership that is positional. Leadership can occur on your team, in your team.
Sure.
That and that responsibility, that ability to kind of pull people together can roll in that space as well.
Yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned that, because as you say, leader doesn't have to be a hierarchical. You know, we show leadership in our day-to-day lives at home and at work every single day, right? And it's a common misconception. So I'm really glad you raised that. And interestingly, you raised another point. I don't know if you're a soccer fan in the US or football fan over here. Manchester United, very famously, Andy Cole and Teddy Sheringham, the 2-star strikers for Manchester United and their European success, they hated each other. They didn't get on at all. They were very vocal about it. But when it came to winning leagues and tournaments and things like that, they came together and they understood there were very talented individuals in the team environment. They don't have to socialize after work. You know, it's when
and back to our example that we used, Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen didn't like each other. Right?
I did not know that either.
But when they were teammates, they knew they were better because the other was sure. There, right? And so there was, though they didn't like each other, they respected each other. And I think that's the real bedrock. Respect.
I had Patricia Fripp on the show quite recently. I love Patricia. I know you know her well, and obviously we were on there talking about presentation skills. Right. Actually, she's on a slightly different show, a payroll podcast of mine, but I might share it on this channel. But she was talking about the importance of presentation, the importance of storytelling. And actually, she said that for her, the biggest skill you need to be a great storyteller is to be able to practice the skill. We don't practice enough until you really know it and you just come up and you're able to see. But if storytelling is so central to momentum, to strong leadership, what would be the key skill that you would recommend our listeners try to, you know, whether it is practice or whatever, what advice would you give them to help them with that particular skill?
So the one thing that I say all the time, I teach storytelling like Patricia, and we actually do it together occasionally. But one of the things one of the things that really stands out is the ability to have a story bank, right? So collect stories that you can tell well. And as she said, practice them, understand them, because a good story can have multiple outcomes, right? It could have multiple landing spots. If the story that we need to tell is one that encourages us to lean in and recognize that we need to cheer for each other better. Tell me a story about a time when um, you struggled with that, because that's probably what some of your teammates are doing. They're struggling with cheering for each other. Tell about a time, but when you were able to get past it, and when doing so led to great outcomes. So think of stories that you have encountered over your career or your life, stories that have you in them. The best stories have you in them, right? They're not the story of Howard Schultz and how he started Starbucks. Great story, but
Sure.
you telling it doesn't mean anything. Tell a story that has you in it, and make sure to have multiple good stories in your story bank. You know, I just returned from being with Patricia Fripp at the National Speakers Association convention. We were both at the Hall of Fame dinner. She's a Hall of Famer. I got a chance last year to be inducted, as you mentioned, and one of the things that we talked about, there was this one great speaker there, and he talked about having 40 stories in his story bank that at any given time he can pull out to be able to lead and inspire others. So that's a real creating that list of stories that have meaning to you and that you can tell well is important, because that bank will give you. Every great coach has a story bank. That's how they do pregame and halftime speeches, right? They have to. It's not just about, we need to move the ball better. No, it's about, hey, by the way, we only have 8 players eligible right now, but 8 is enough. And let me tell you about a time when all I had was 8 players and we won the national championship.
It's adding the why, isn't it? And interestingly, on Patricia, she was, even though she'd been speaking here for 30, 40 years, I think she said now, she still practiced really hard for that particular speech that you referred to. And, you're always honing your craft. Interestingly, and I'll mention this, just while we were talking about that, I've got a mantra that I grew up by. And my wife made me these. They're 3 little pictures where life's about, and especially for those watching in video, stories. That's been my mantra my whole life. I always think when you're on your, I lost my father last year, and when you're in that moment, what you have left is the stories of your life, the memories. They're the things we need to hold on to them. We need to nurture them. Yeah.
Stories live forever, right? I mean, there's a reason why we marvel when we walk into cave structures that, in France and other, where there are stories on the walls of these caves, and you're looking there going, wow, that's 3,000, 2,000 years old. And stories were what, and that is how we can connect to people we would obviously never get a chance to meet.
Well, I feel disappointed I have more time to delve into more of yours with 12 Years at Sports Illustrated and your books and all the wonderful things that you've done. I know you've got you're a fan of history as well with some of your best-selling books that you've written. So I feel like we could have taken this in many, many different directions. But I want to bring it back for my last question before we open the vault in relation to your book. Is there a question I haven't asked, or is there an insight that you would like to share that we haven't covered today that you think would be really useful for our listeners before we move on to the final section of the show?
I do. So one of the elements, you mentioned all the interviews and we mentioned the 4 verticals, but one of the extra elements we did to create some original research in this project was we went into the field with a polling company to interview 4,000 Americans, 4,000. Actually, most were in the United States. There were some from the UK, but we asked basically a handful of questions around momentum. Have you ever experienced it in your company? Does your company talk about it? But one question really stood out, and that was, if you sensed that your company was losing momentum, that there was a competitor who was taking it from you and on a day-to-day basis taking it to you, what would your reaction be? 72% of them said they were likely or somewhat likely to consider leaving a company that was losing momentum. So this idea of momentum and what it can mean to your company isn't just a nice to have conversation. This is an imperative. If we could lose a healthy chunk of our employee base because we're not managing this process, then that's on us. That's on us.
Yeah, I'm really glad I asked the question, because that, I'm sure, will speak very loudly to the audience we have on this show, right? Because they're the people responsible often for or certainly held accountable for retention within their businesses and employees leaving, and the employee experience. And actually that brings momentum into sharp focus at a bigger scale. It's not just about individual momentum or even just individual teams. It's actually they're all micro cultures that form into one major culture of an organization. We don't want to lose that momentum. So thank you for sharing that as a final finish to the main part of the show. I'm going to open up what we call here the HR L&D Vault for you, Don. These are 3 short, sharp questions as to round off the show today. But this will be featured in a special episode as well as today's episode later on as well. So get a chance for our listeners to hear it again. First question is, what's the single most transformative leadership moment you've experienced in your career?
It was a negative moment. I own several companies, and we discovered that one of my employees, a senior and very important employee, had been stealing from us for a large number, $300,000 over the course of several years. And when we discovered it, obviously we had to escort the employee out. I had to gather everybody, and with tears in my eyes, I had to tell them I let them down, like that I'd let this happen. My failure to oversee the situation was the reason we were in this hole, and I didn't know how deep the hole was going to get. And
wow.
That openness, that raw authenticity. I walked upstairs, closed the door of my office because I was crying about how bad this was going to be. I had no idea that it would be $300,000. It's a lot of money in a little company, right? And the first 2 knocks on the door were 2 of my most senior employees who came in and said, look, I so trust you. Like, I've been here for a decade. I so trust you that if you need to hold my salary to make sure other people get paid, I know you're good for it. And when 2 employees will tell you that, suddenly you feel different about what you're up against, because people have your back.
Well, I think it's so powerful. I'm not sure I should ask the next 2 questions. Vulnerability, authenticity, they're very, very powerful things. And, that I think that speaks volumes for the kind of leader that you were in that moment, and I'm sure still are. So I would take that away. That's a huge lesson to learn, and in uncomfortable circumstances, a wonderful thing to discover at the same time.
Most uncomfortable. Yeah. I mean, to have to escort a senior executive in your company out the door, and then ultimately to watch her go to prison. She went to prison for 3.5 years. It's crazy. But it's a big thing that happens. And unfortunately it happens far more often than we care to admit.
It does. Well, I appreciate you very much, Don, for sharing. So thank you. Question number 2, looking back, what's one piece of advice you wish you'd received when you started your career?
Patience. I think I was always in a hurry. Like I had set for myself some numbers. I had to achieve this position by this year. And I had to, if I wasn't in that role by this year, I will have considered myself a failure. And I put all these imaginary standards for myself that I think probably robbed me of some of the joy of achievement.
I'm loving the vulnerability and honesty you're sharing with me here, Don. This is fantastic, and I hope it's resonating with our listeners. My last question is this: as I've 12 times, I believe, New York best-selling author, I'm going to ask this question to. But what's one book you would recommend that every HR professional, talent leader, learning director, whoever it might be, should read or engage with, if they have the opportunity to do so?
So I would tell you, there's a former Continental Airlines CEO named Greg Brenneman, who wrote a book around leadership that, to me, and I'm sorry I can't recall the name of the book, but okay. But I read it several years ago, reread it a couple of years ago, and I just really, it stood out to me as one of those leadership books that is that's timeless and that will be valuable for all of us. And it deals heavily in the worlds of turning amazing organizations, difficult organizations around. Continental Airlines obviously would be classic turnaround. But but the willingness to be vulnerable and open as he did so was really important as well.
Well, Don, thank you ever so much for sharing. I think it's been a real privilege, honestly, for me as a host to unpack how we can ignite momentum, to discover some of your own wonderful stories and to experience your storytelling skill, but also to really understand how momentum can form part of, not just an individual skill, but as a strategy for businesses to really propel themselves forward, with conviction, with urgency, with resilience. It's been a really fascinating journey. And of course, if people have enjoyed this show, please do go and grab yourself a copy of The New Science of Momentum. It's available now from HarperCollins. Yeah, grab two. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, grab two. Grab as many as you can. I'll put a few links in the show notes, also directly to Don Yaeger's website, which is donyaeger.com. That's YAEGER.com. So I'll put a link in the show notes for that as well. And of course, I will put a link to your wonderful podcast. It's called the Corporate Competitor Podcast. Please do go and listen. And we know that people love to gorge on more than just one podcast. If you're into this genre, you tend to listen to several. So add that to your list, subscribe and follow. And I'll put a link to the book, to the website, and to the podcast in the show notes. But Don Yaeger, thank you ever so much. It's been my real privilege to have you on my show today. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. And I wish you every success with the book. And thank you, listeners, for joining us today. Please do remember to follow, subscribe, and share this with your colleagues and friends and help them to build momentum in their organizations and sustain it as well. Don, thank you ever so much.
Deal is the all-in-one platform to hire, manage, and pay your global team, giving HR one place to work instead of juggling disconnected systems. From onboarding to offboarding, Deal brings payroll, compliance, and even IT access together across 150 plus countries, all on infrastructure they built themselves. That means HR isn't wrestling with logins, tabs, and tools all day long. Book your demo today at DEEL.com/NickDayHR. That's deal.com/NickDayHR.